Thanks for being here. Excited to hear what's happening and from our specialists. We'll go ahead and start with Austin Pearson with a weather report.
Good morning, everybody. Hope everyone is doing well and surviving the uh, somewhat challenging conditions here in central Indiana over the last 7 days, the last 14 days, really. We've had quite a few uh, areas with yeah. So we've had a lot of rain, especially in central Indiana over the last 14 to 21 days across the state. And one of the biggest stories though is just the below normal temperatures that we've been experiencing for the last 30 days. And this really stems back to May 1st as well. And we can see that in the growing degree day accumulations in the next slide. But average temperatures anywhere from 1 degree below normal in the south to as much as 5 degrees below normal in the north. So for that period, same thing for the maximum temperatures, but the minimum temperatures haven't been as abnormal for that particular period. But looking at the modified growing degree day accumulations, this is base 50 degrees Fahrenheit, ceiling 86. We've had accumulations just shy of 360 units in the north, all the way down to more than 800 units in the extreme southwest in Posey County. And when looking at the departure from normal for this particular period, we can see that most in the state is anywhere from 60 to 120 units below normal for this time of year. So, as these are purely temperature driven, the below normal temperatures also equating to the below normal accumulation of growing degree days. And so, one of the tools that we have at the Midwestern Regional Climate Center is the corn growing degree day tool, and it just utilizes that base 50, ceiling 86 for the degree day threshold accumulation. And this tool, if you haven't seen it before, you can go in and you can insert your plant date, which would be your growing degree day start. You would specify your corn maturity days. I selected a 108-day variety. And then you can also look at the freezing temperature thresholds at 28 and 32 degrees for this particular product. And so what this does is it starts the growing degree day accumulation based on that May 15th start date. So you can see smack dab in the middle between May and June. And you can see we had a bit of a warm start to that where we were tracking growing degree days above normal. And then ever since that latter part of May, in that cool Memorial Day weekend where we had frost reported around the state in some locations with lows in the mid 30s for many locations. And so since then, growing degree days have been tracking well below normal. And you can see here on that chart, the green line indicates that the purple line shows the normal accumulation of growing degree days. But looking at this projection, the crop, if you planted on that May 15th date, you would be reaching silking for that particular crop in mid to late July. And so you can see that there is a range for which this would happen. And the earliest date would be probably about a week ahead of that. And then the latest date would be the last week in July. And that just depends on how the accumulation of growing degree days goes for the rest of the growing season. Based on the CPC, Climate Prediction Center outlooks, I don't think we're going to have too many issues with that. And I think with the warming temperatures that we have forecast, will help rebound on some of those things on the growing degree day accumulations there as well. But looking at this particular plot, we can be getting it at black layer in that mid to late September timeframe for this particular crop and that maturity. And also keep in mind, this was for Tippecanoe County. So when you go to this tool, you can go back and specify the county and location in which you want this to show the accumulations. And so these blue bars again show the probability or the frequency in which we had freezing events that hit that 28-degree threshold. And so we have had some freezes right around the black layer time for this particular this particular event right here. So just know that we try to get this crop in before we hit that maturity, before we hit the freeze. We want to have the maturities happening before that freeze risk goes up. And so obviously we're not to 2019 levels that we had, but still something that we're looking at and monitoring as we go through the growing season. One of the other biggest stories has been the drier conditions up in northwestern Indiana. And so we have had some improvement, especially on the eastern fringe of this drought region, with well above normal precipitation over the last few weeks here. And we've even had some improvement in the Jasper, Newton, and Lake counties, and even over into Porter and LaPorte. So we can see that we've had that there. Um, we've called for additional improvement on the western side of this D1, and so this D1 is going to continue to shrink likely if the national drought authors agree with our recommendation this week. Again, the thing that's really driving that is that increased precipitation. And so we had some areas here. This is the last 30-day accumulation, a couple of areas southwest of Indianapolis, and then up here in Clinton, Howard, and Tipton counties, where we've had more than 7.5 inches of precipitation. Just a lot of rain, a lot of drowned out crops, and just not really uh, great growing conditions for these crops to get going. So we're going to probably end up losing quite a few corn crops, bean crops. I don't know if there's going to be any replant. We'll be sure to hear from Sean or whoever else is going to be on the call to talk about that. But really, just a couple of those areas where we've been dealing with those drowned out conditions. And I wanted to highlight, since I live in Howard County, we had the highest precipitation in the state over the last 30 days. And so we can see we had just shy of 12 inches over that period. We had a pretty significant flood event a couple weeks prior. The same location got hit with 6 inches plus, with some radar estimates of over 7.5 inches here this last week. And I know Hans Schmitz sent me some articles down in southern Indiana where they've had similar rains as well. And so with that soil moisture has increased across most of the central part of the state, with some decreases up in northwestern Indiana where we didn't have as much of the precipitation, but overall, staying consistent but more wet in the central location of the state this particular week. Looking at the quantitative precipitation forecast, I think our biggest chance for rain is going to be tomorrow, and that also comes with elevated chances for severe weather and primarily wind. So I'll show you the current enhanced risk for the state of Indiana for tomorrow afternoon and evening. But we do see heavier precipitation along the northern Indiana area up near Lake Michigan, with precipitation higher than 1.5 inches up to 2 inches, and another band in southern Indiana. And it really just depends on where these heavier storms set up. And so it's one of those things that we see, but once we get after this 7-day period, the GFS model is really showing just typical summertime, just pop-up storms. Nothing, no real consistent system that's put together, but you get these bubbling storms that pop up, and where you get rain and your neighbor doesn't, or vice versa. So that's something that we have to keep an eye on there as well. But here is that enhanced risk for tomorrow, for pretty much the entirety of all the way down to Evansville, up north of Fort Wayne. And so pretty significant chance for wind damage. And so we'll see if this does cause any issues with crops, blowing crops over. We could see some crops at 45-degree angles, and they'll typically grow out of it, but something to keep an eye on there as well. The 6 to 10 today, temperature and precipitation outlook. We do have elevated chances for above normal temperatures, and looking at the GFS model, we do have several chances for 80s that are going to be hitting into the forecast area. And so we do have mid to upper 80s. We do have also chances for moderate risk for hazardous temperatures June 24th through the 25th. So something to keep an eye out there. But I've seen temperatures in the mid to upper 80s and even low 90s down in central Indiana. So something to keep an eye on. And also, if we have elevated dew points, certainly chances for popcorn and summertime thunderstorms that could pop up for that. And another slight risk for heavy precipitation in northwestern Indiana for the 24th and 25th of this month. These maps have not changed. Um, these maps have not changed since the last time Beth talked with you, but did want to say that we have elevated chances for above normal temperatures and equal chances for above normal or below normal precipitation for the overall month of June. Several locations in north central will end up above normal for the month, but even looking into the seasonal temperature outlook, elevated chances for above normal temperatures and equal chances for above or below normal precipitation. And we'll get those new outlooks this Thursday. So if you're dying to know what the outlook's going to look like, you can look at the Climate Prediction Center website on Thursday afternoon.
Thanks, Austin. Any questions weather-wise? We will turn it over to Dan Quinn to talk about our corn crop.
Thanks, Shalee. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. Sorry, I'm in the truck here. I'll buy some fields, but yeah, just it's kind of all over the place. I think I've said this every couple weeks we have this meeting. Just largely depends on where you're at in the state. Calls to and emails for me have just kind of been sporadic in terms of issues. Big one is, Austin kind of touched on this a little bit is, there's still some areas of the state, eastern part of the state that are still trying to get some seed in the ground. I've worked with a few different people just getting able to get some early maturing hybrids. So kind of walking through that and Austin showed that U2U tool and paying attention to the first frost date in the fall. But was able to help some folks. There was seed availability for the folks that I had talked to get some early maturing hybrids to get those in. But a lot of people are just kind of wrapping up in some of those areas of the state. You flip to other parts of the state, there's corn that's V8, V9 pushing, chest high already that was planted in mid to late April in there. So kind of all over the board in terms of where the crop is at. Few replants that I've heard of, largely in those areas that have either been really wet were planted too wet because they're trying to push it because they're late. So some replants and poor emergence in some of those areas. Had heard some reports on some of that drowned out corn in some of those areas that had heavy rainfall as well. Looking at USDA crop condition ratings, I think we're about 70% good to excellent, which from a statewide perspective is pretty good. Anytime we can kind of hover around that 70% good to excellent, that's pretty good indicator of crop condition around the state. So a lot of good looking crops out there. It just is, it's just so variable in terms of where things are at and when they were planted. Couple things I know in kind of more central Indiana area where the earlier planted stuff, some folks that are been running in up against the clock here with side dress. So a lot of side dress has been going on, but then you sprinkle in the rain that keeps getting delayed and the crop does not slow down for you. So I've heard of some reports, folks switching to maybe getting the sprayer, wide drop, stuff like that, a little bit higher clearance equipment to get to some of the corn. So some of that nitrogen maybe a little bit later being applied than what we originally hoped in some of those areas. But again, all across the board in terms of where the crop's at, what stage it's at, what conditions it's at. There's stuff, like I said, waist to chest height, and there's stuff just getting planted and just getting emerged in the state. But in terms of, major issues, it's largely just been, pretty much local areas, kind of specific local conditions where we've seen issues occur. But big ones have been a little bit of replanting occurring, some hybrid seed changes, and then also, working through side dress and getting all the side dress on while we're dodging some of the rains around the state. But other than that, I don't have anything think major, I'll let Darcy speak to disease and other things like that today, but nothing major. I've had sulfur deficiency popping up around the state. Probably some of you have seen some of that as well. So that's kind of been the main nutrient issue that's been popping up in certain areas as well. But nothing, crazy from my end. It's just highly variable, and that's been the case really since the beginning of the year, where the crop's at and what conditions are, and what people are dealing with. A lot of it's just very location specific at this moment. But I would say across the board, a lot of the crop does look pretty good, especially if it's emerged well. It's often going. A lot of corn that's really in that rapid growth phase right now, looking dark green, looking good in a lot of areas. So there's a lot of good looking corn out there, but there's a lot of areas that have struggled a little bit with delayed planting and flooding and stuff like that.
Thank you, Dan. So, Marguerite, if you have anything with hemp production.
Yeah, I have a couple slides that I'll pull up for what I've been seeing out in my plots last week. And when I get out there this week, it'll be interesting to see what is going on. Um, But similar to soybeans, hemp is susceptible to soil crusting, which many of you may be familiar with. I think depending on where you are in the state, you may have seen this year already. We saw this out at the agronomy farm. I planted, we got an inch and a half of rain, 24 hours later, and then it started to gradually dry out. Um, and then we got some rain, and then we got another crusting event. And so with hemp, what happens similar to soybeans is as that plant tries to push through the soil, the hypocotyl can swell and break. And if that hypocotyl breaks or is too damaged, that seedling will die. And so we see this a lot in our fine textured soils, material low in organic matter. Um, if there isn't a lot of surface residue, or if you get a really torrential downfall, which is what we had, which is not ideal, especially for hemp planting. We try to avoid it as much as possible, which is not always possible for us to do out with our research plots. So what I saw last week is I started walking the plots, and some of the plants that sort of got through that initial, rain event before it started to crust looked really good. And then we had sort of a second and third set of emergence. And so I had these plants that had these downward turned leaves, looked really sickly. We have a closer up of that on the left, and then damage to the hypocotyl, and then below that also some root tissue. Um, so this is pretty consistent through most of the plots where these plants that look really sickly on this kind of, downward leaf curl. And then this damage where either there's, swelling and breakage, there's like layers of tissue that are peeling back. Um, I sent some tissue into that also looked like there might be some damping off and some disease issue going on as well. But I'll have whole rows within plots where the plants look like this. So it's pretty consistent across the majority of the material. But there are variety differences, which I think is really important. I've talked with some of my growers in the state, one of whom is dealing with some of these issues as well. And it appears that there are some varieties that really can handle crusting events. So on the left, sort of, you can maybe see on the bottom part of the photo, there's a plot that doesn't have a lot of emergence. And then if you go up a little bit, you have a plot that looks really good and really luscious, almost closed canopy. And then if you go a little bit further, there's one that looks better than the first plot. And I see that across the entire field where I have specific genetics that had larger seed size or more vigorous. They were able to establish before crusting occurred, and the plots look a lot better. So one of the things to consider if you do have people that are interested in hemp in the future is just selecting cultivars that maybe can deal with some of these adverse soil conditions and can really push through either a light crust or establish before a crust forms if you have a rain event. So I'm pretty excited that at least we see some of those differences. There'll be plots that really don't yield much because of the damage to the seedlings, but it's a learning experience either way. So it's very interesting. I haven't had quite this stark of a difference across the genetics we're working with. So that's all I have about sort of what I saw in the field last week. And then I will have a save the date go out probably this week or early next week. We'll have our field day July 30th out at the Agronomy Center, where myself and some others will talk about hemp production with a focus on grain and fiber. We'll have some of our growers come out and talk about their experiences, and then we'll also talk about post-harvest management of the stalks and the grain, storage conditions, handling, things like that, and then product development. So if you all are interested or have individuals interested, please send them, to the agronomy farm on July 30th. It'll be a half day event with lunch provided. So I'm looking forward to, showing off what we have going on, talking about some of the issues we've seen, and having people hear from our growers.
Awesome. Thanks, Marguerite. Sounds like a good field day coming up. Thank you. Okay, if there's no questions for Marguerite, I do have a forage update from Elysia Rodgers. She is not able to join us today, but she did send Jeff and I an update. So she says, on the forages side, I just want to encourage producers to make sure their hay is dry enough to put up in the barns if they are making dry round bales. I have heard several people this spring say that they're just rushing to put it in the barn and it's going to be going in at 22 to 30% moisture or higher in a couple cases. Moisture meters are not that expensive to purchase compared to a new barn or other issues later in the animals we're feeding. If it is being put in the barn at that 20 to 30% window, we do encourage the use of preservatives, like salt, for example, on the bales to help them dry down. You can see pages 233 to 250 in the fourth edition of the Forage Field Guide for more information about properly drying down hay. So that is her update. Okay, with that, we'll hand it over to Darcy with diseases.
If I can get started. So good morning, everyone. I do have some updates actually today. First, I wanted to start with wheat. I know the southern part of Indiana, the wheat is getting ready to be harvested if the weather conditions hold out, if it dries out enough. Just as a reminder, I think most of it's been clean, but if you see issues or you hear of issues with head scab, or please let me know. Be interested in collecting that. Our plots here in West Lafayette have a little bit, but it's mostly clean. The big thing I've been dealing with the last week is we did confirm tar spot, and hopefully if I can share where we found it here is in our research plots up at Penny. These plots have been continuous corn and no-till. So that's the first thing I want to emphasize is it's in areas where we have a lot more residue available. And then this is our early planted corn. So this corn was planted at the end of April. What I'm showing here is you can see the plant here. And if I zoom in, you can see that one little spot that I'm finding. I am not worried about spraying for this right now, but that is what we're looking for on when we're scouting those plots. So in those plots, I found maybe 3 to 4 plants out of 260 plants in a plot. So it's a very relatively low, less than 1% incidence in those plots. But I just thought I'd show you some pictures of that. Let me see if I can move back to show you just some other images. So this is kind of what we're looking at. Since I've released that report and turned the county on, I knew that was going to start a lot of activity. There's been a lot of false reports or images coming in that are insect frass, and I'm going to show you some examples I saw yesterday. But again, here you can kind of see when you're looking for it, if you're out in some fields, it's not as black as you think it should be. So I would call that a dark brown kind of color, elongated, not very circular as compared to insect frass. If I were to flip this leaf over, there might be a lesion on the other, should be a lesion on the other side if I have tar spot. And let me see if I can move and see if I can find a picture here to show you that. So again, where we found one lesion on the lower leaves, there's one example on a cotyledon. Again, another example in that lower section here on that leaf. Similar, oops. And so actually, here's where I flipped it. So again, here is this one leaf where I have tar spot here on that single leaf. I flip it over, and then there's the little spot exactly on the other side of the leaf where the lesion's gone all the way through. And that's one way to try to check it. And then I distinguish it from insect frass. And if I can go, let me know if I go to so if I switch, can you guys see this photo now with the insect frass? Yep, okay. So this is an example of the insect frass that might be confusing and is what is pretty active out there. You can see they're darker black. They're real black kind of spots, very circular. If I were to rub them off, they'd come right off. Flip it over, they're not on the other side. So you can see an example. There's a lot of different insect marks there. The other thing I notice, generally, if I see insect feeding, so like some of these lesions here where insect feeding has been, that kind of gives me indication it may not be tar spot. I'm gonna go the other way. Let's see if I had it. Nope. Where's my other leaf? Let's see my pictures. Nope, it's up here on the website. Sorry, I apologize. I'm gonna see if I can find it again. On the leaves, I'll go back to my phone images so you can see. Can you see that in Google? That's still the same leaf I had kind of shown you. Again, another leaf with just insect frass, very circular, very black spots. Generally, if you rub at it, it's going to come off. Now, I've had reports that they can't get it to come off. That's when I would say, if you're not sure and you think it's something, send us a picture. If you take a picture of the leaf, be ready to send me a leaf because I may say I can't tell from that picture. Send the leaf in and send it in to John and we'll cover those samples. So we do have funding for both corn and soybean samples to be sent in. And so I just thought I'd share that. The other thing I wanted to share is if you're, let me see, I lost it. Nope, I'm looking at something else. I can't. Hold on. The new tar spotter app is no longer functioning. What we have is the crop risk tool, which is on the website at Crop Protection Network. And so what I'm showing here is where I've inputted all the farms that we're at for the season. So you can go in, whatever is on your phone or in your computer, and I've downloaded what I put on the computer to my phone, so then I can bring up the same sites on my phone. But you'll have to do that if you switch between a phone and computer. But if you go back, it should remember your locations if you're interested. And what it does is it's running the weather conditions for the various diseases. So you can go down here and click the past month, the past year. And so what I'm showing is the past, actually looks like a week or so of weather data. And what I have here, so I have all my sites and you can, so there's corn and soybean models being run. But you can kind of see here for corn, we have both a tar spot and a gray leaf spot model. And as I scroll down, it's high. We've had these cool, wet conditions that are conducive for these foliar diseases. So if the crop is in the right stage, we do have conducive conditions. You can kind of see where the forecast for Southwest Pack is declining as we've had drier conditions. So again, that may mean that we don't need to worry about it. The thing about this tool is what we're wanting to look at is when we're at V10 is when we want to look at the tool to make a decision on a fungicide. So we're not quite there across the state. Even in the sites where we have found tar spot, I want them to hold on and wait. Our data has shown really the most effective timing if we started early. And so what I'm thinking about is the next round of spores being released and when do they get into the canopy. And those are the scoutings that we're really looking for in the next couple of weeks. But when we find that our timing trials have shown that we want to spray at that late vegetative. If we go at that late vegetative, we're going to have to come in a second time. And so thinking about the corn prices, I really want a one well-timed application. So I want to hold on and wait to tassel. And every year we've done research, the tassel application, even in this plot where I found it early, our tassel application did provide decent protection and yield and provided that yield response that we want to get a return on investment. So when you got growers that are worrying about it, I again want them to hold on and be ready and thinking about what they need to do. But right now, the point is that we have it. Be out looking for it in the next couple of weeks to make an informed decision if we're going to spray. And I would still wait for that tassel silking. I did look back in some of that data recently with a grad student and where we had a 2-pass program that year in 2021 where it really showed good tar spot control. Even though so we looked at a V8 followed by 3 week later application and then a VT followed by 3 week later application. And there was a slight difference in the amount of disease at the end of the end of the season with that later application, a little more disease got in the canopy. But that being said, the yield response was the same for those programs. And that's why I really want them to hold on and wait. Generally, I want to wait till tassel, but if you want to trigger, if they got to get it a little earlier, I want to wait till those late vegetative stages. to spray. And then if we trigger those earlier applications, we're going to need to think about a second application coming back in later on, because we're not going to get us to black layer. We're not going to have, 3 or 4 weeks from that initial application, those products are going to be losing their activity, and we may need to protect the canopy, especially since we know the disease really takes off later in the season. So that's my little spiel on trying to manage tar spot. It's here, just be out scouting. I'm really interested in what's going to happen the next couple weeks. We have had the conducive conditions, the cool, wet conditions that are going to promote it in those canopies where we have corn that's growing. So that's what I would think about doing for that. While I was out, so I did make a trip out to Randolph County yesterday, looking around at some of those sites that really got hit hard last year. And at this point in time, in those sites, we did not find tar spots. So, which is good news. And I think that we don't, have to worry about it quite yet. But because we have found it active in the state, just want to be, keeping an eye on the next couple of weeks and seeing if growers can find it in their fields and then make that informed decision. But again, if you have questions, send photos, send samples, and we'll try to answer them with the clinic. I also pulled a rust sample yesterday too in that field. I believe it's mostly common rust, so I'm not concerned about that. But again, the clinic, we got to look under the scope and compare the spores to really confirm if it's southern rust, which is the disease we're of concern. Right now, southern rust reports are only in Florida, Georgia border is where they found it. So it's still down south. It hasn't really moved up. So I'll be watching that map and keeping you posted if it starts moving our way. But generally, that's all I got right now on corn. Please send me questions and we'll try to answer that. And I think that's about it, unless anybody has any other questions on other diseases, issues. I'd say with the flooding conditions, keep in mind that we had flooding. And so any pathogen in the soil-borne pathogen in that area may move into those plants and also cause issues. But I would say flooding is probably the biggest concern that we got to remind ourselves that when we get later in the.
We'll move on to irrigation. Lyndon Kelley is not on today, but Jeff put some links and things in the chat for you to review. Jeff, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, sure. What Lyndon was writing about there was that the estimated evaporation amount is about 1.5 inches at a V6. So what that means is you're losing 1.5 inches of water from your soil. It is important to remember that most of our soils have the ability to hold about 2.5 to 3 inches, maybe or even 5 inches of rainfall in them. I usually estimate up here on our sands about 1 inch per foot of depth, or about 1 inch of rain per foot of depth of soil. And so, I think Lyndon told me earlier or last week when I met with him that, this may be a time of the year when you could bank a little bit of that, put it down in there, and get it deep into the soil, because it's not going to evaporate right away. You can get it down in there, and you can add a little extra rainfall or a little extra water to the soil profile, and it'll be there for when the crop roots get to it. Versus later in the season, it gets really, really hard to put on that extra water because it's so hot and things tend to evaporate off the surface before they can get down in there kind of deep. So Lyndon also sent along some tools that you can use to measure or track your rainfall and also your irrigation applications. It basically uses a checkbook method. Put a little bit of water in, take a little bit of water out from the crop and evaporation. And it gives you a good idea. Normally you don't want to get that profile much below about 40%, 50% of the soil profile, because then the crops will start suffering. So that's pretty much what Lyndon's been saying for years, and it's a tried and true method of scheduling your irrigation systems.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff. Tommy Butts with weeds.
All right. Weeds are fun. Cool weeds. There's not a whole lot, I guess, to update necessarily on recommendations for managing weeds this week. It's kind of the same old stuff we've talked about before. Start watching cutoff timings, especially corn. Corn is definitely starting to get past some of those cutoff timings, 12-inch atrazine cutoff. I know there's a few fields I've been by that are starting to get to that 30-inch cutoff for most of our herbicides. So just be aware of that we start shutting some of that stuff down when we get there. beans, most of the state is not anywhere near a cutoff yet, but we're fixing to hit our solstice here in the next week or so, and that should start triggering, at least in some form or fashion, beans to start to flower. And once we hit R1 and R2, that starts really shutting down a lot of our soybean applications too. So just be aware of those cutoff timing. The heat has started popping water hemp in a whole lot more places than we've had the last few weeks. So that officially started coming on strong, and we've been getting a lot of complaints, especially in corn, of failures with HPPDs and atrazine. And even the mixture that's normally pretty good, where we've got the synergy part of it, it's not holding back near as long, and we're not killing stuff that's up, and it's just not looking good on some of our water hemp out there. So we're not exactly sure if that's some enhanced metabolism stuff where it's breaking down the herbicides faster, or if the weeds are resistant actually now, or developing resistance, or if it's just been poor application conditions. We've had really bad weather, honestly, for trying to make successful herbicide applications. So, and maybe it's a combination of all three. But either way, we've heard quite a few complaints that that's not being effective. And if that goes out the window, we have pretty limited options for water hemp at that point. It's kind of down to the dicambas, and residuals, and maybe some Liberty. But we also have a couple complaints out there of potential Liberty resistance in our water hemp as well, across the state. So the main thing is I guess just keep on after it. Let us know if you do have any growers, or if there are any growers out there that have concerns with the glufosinate resistance, the auxin resistance, and if there's more complaints on like the combination of atrazine and HPPDs failing. I think the more we know about that, the more we can map the distribution, the better off we'll be on some of that too. So, with that, I think that's kind of the main highlights, unless anybody's got any questions for me.
Thanks, Tommy. We'll go to John Bonkowski with the PPDL.
Howdy, everybody. So, piggybacking on what Darcy was talking about with the flooding, with excessive rainfall, we end up having greater chance of root rot problems. Some it's abiotic because of the flooding, but sometimes we can have other pathogens pathogens in general, move into the roots and cause root stress. So recently we've actually been getting corn and soybean plants coming in with root damage, crown rot symptoms, and we've been pulling out some of the usual suspects like Fusarium, Pythium, and sporadically Phytophthora. As time goes on, especially as it kind of warms up and there's still rainfall, we might see more Phytophthora stem rot issues. And so I would say just keep an eye at the base of the plants, especially in these low areas in the field, in these pockets. And you might see kind of dark gray lesions developing from the base of the plant moving upward. If you want confirmation, feel free to send in a sample and we can diagnose that. But once again, as it stays wet, we are probably going to see more of those issues. Something that I'd always like to mention is that as there are these pockets of issues in the ground, we have more than one problem present. Often we might think that there's one issue, one pathogen that might be the worst, but we might have more than one problem, even in one little small area in the soil or across the whole field. So it's important to keep an eye out for all the different kinds of symptoms that could be associated with these issues. But of course, when you're in the field, you might be missing certain things, or you might actually need to go to microscopic examination. So of course, once again, with any root rot problems, if you don't have any clear symptoms of a very particular disease problem, feel free to reach out. We'd be happy to help. One other thing that we've seen a few times this season already are, I would say, suspect nematode injury, not necessarily cyst nematode on soybean or anything like that, but there are a number of different plant pathogenic or plant parasitic nematodes that attack the root system, and they can lead to odd looking roots. They're maybe healthy at first, or they might look like they have truncated root tips. They might look kind of zigzaggy from damage from nematode feeding. So normally when we see nematodes in the soil, or at least nematode damage, it's a patchy distribution in the field, and it might not be very widespread. But it's one thing that we want to keep a mind open to, because we've had a number of samples come in where people are thinking there's root rot or even chemical damage, and the distribution in the field just doesn't make sense. But some of the symptoms really look like nematode injury. I might be able to find a resource or two I could send to Shalee on that, but I didn't have anything prepared on hand, so I apologize.
Thanks, John. So we'll go to the Office of the State Chemist with Joe Becovitz.
Good morning. I think rather brief update today. Last week we had 17 drift complaints. That's probably representing the peak of our first wave of the drift season. With the pre-plant burn downs, that's what most of these complaints are responding to. When these drift complaints come in, they're usually 2 weeks to 4 weeks behind whenever the application was made. So we have two other waves that we're probably looking to be dealing with, one of which will be when they start their second over-the-top applications in soybeans, and then, of course, the aerial application of corn, which looks like that wave might be delayed a little bit. But that's about all I've got, unless somebody has a question.
Thank you, Joe. All right, with that being said, thank you everyone for taking part today and sharing. And hopefully, with the next time we meet on July 1st, we'll have some big changes for the better. And take care, and we'll see you guys soon.